I'm on a budget, okay? Helloing everybody. As I'm pretty sure you all know, as we now enter October, not only does that mean that 2024 is almost over and we are 1 year closer to our eventual death, it's also the time of year where we get to celebrate one of the most important holidays. Halloween!
And what better way to start this festive event than with a video game franchise that is near and dear to my heart and for whatever reason caused a few piss stains on the living room carpet from a bunch of people when it first released. Now, if you've been a fan of this channel for a while now, I think it's safe to say that you all should know that I love Resident Evil to an extremely massive fault.
I just need to purchase a few more of these tools that I can truly enjoy these games to the fullest extent.
And with a franchise as massive and as long-running as Resident Evil, it's went through a large variety of games. We obviously have the pure survival horror games. That includes everything from fixed camera angles, tank controls, and sandwiches.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Then moving over to 2005 until 2016, this is where I think the series had the largest identity crisis, because at this point Capcom was treating Resident Evil like the one guy that tries to impress the chick at a party by changing his personality every 3 seconds, except Capcom is the worst wingman of all time. And thankfully, starting in 2017 till today, Capcom finally got their heads out of their asses and gave the fans the type of games that they deserve. Sometimes.
But yeah, despite all of these missteps, Resident Evil still remains one of my favorite and a lot of people's favorite franchises of all time. And hell, it's even thanks to some of these missteps, thanks to Resident Evil, that I was able to cement myself in a place in YouTube history, despite how much mental anguish the games I covered caused me.
But now if you've been a fan of this franchise where homeless people try to vor you in a filthy back alley, it's pretty safe to assume that you know that Resident Evil really loves spin-offs, even all the way back in the series' inception. And all of that started with the release of 2000's Resident Evil Survivor for the PS1 and Windows. Now, since Resident Evil has already been 3 games strong at this point, committing pretty damn well to its survival horror roots and just kept getting better and better with every subsequent game, Resident Evil Survivor aimed to do one thing: not do that. Yes, as I'm pretty sure if you've read the video's title and, you know, opened your eyes, then I'm pretty damn sure it doesn't take a rocket scientist to explain that Resident Evil Survivor isn't your typical Resident Evil game. Firstly, it aims to answer the question of what everything would look like if you took the camera from the old RE games and just plopped it into the main character's head. But besides that obvious observation, what the hell is Resident Evil Survivor? Well, you see, it's a spin-off to the main series developed by a company called Tosei, I hope I was pronouncing that right, who, after just taking a quick glance at their Wikipedia page, they surprisingly have got a pretty damn substantial amount of games they've worked on, dating all the way back on the NES, all the way to helping with co-development on some modern games for the PS5. Hell, some of the games they developed previously I've actually played and heard a lot about, like Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22 and GT Final Bout. Games that aren't sparking zero, I'll tell you that much right now. And just also digging slightly a little bit deeper, they've had a hand in co-developing a few more Resident Evil games after Survivor, like Resident Evil 0. A game that sucks, but thankfully it seems they got their head out of their asses because they've helped develop the Mercenaries 3D as well as Resident Evil Revelations, and if their port sections is anything to go off of, they were even the ones responsible for porting Revelations to 7th gen systems, so I suppose that's pretty cool. But unfortunately for them, they started out their Resident Evil career by making this, and you don't need to go any further than a search on YouTube to find out that Resident Evil Survivor isn't exactly the most beloved game in the series. Hell, even when I was still at the peak of my channel's history, when I was still doing Let's Plays, I actually did a video on Survivor where for some reason I made it into this like swan song video for my channel because I just started my 2nd year in college and I just didn't think I would have enough time to continuously upload.
Yeah, I'm sure all 50 of you appreciated that send-off.
But since this year I had the sudden urge to go through some PS1 games, of course Resident Evil Survivor was one of those games that I thought would be a good idea to revisit. Not because I wanted to, but it's just because I'm a fan of the series and I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't go through every single game that this franchise has to offer. And ever since I went through a few other games that I'll get to later in this video, so don't worry about that, it even pushed me further into wanting to give this game a go again, just to see whether or not my opinion has changed, and to also cover it on a YouTube video because my rent is due. And upon loading the game up again, I didn't actually hate it as much. Granted, I already didn't really hate it as much as most YouTubers who've covered this game on this platform. I just found it more boring than anything else. But upon me revisiting this game, I didn't really mind it. In fact, I kinda wanna say I started to like it. Actually, who gives a shit? I really enjoyed my time playing RE Survivor. For completely shallow reasons I'll get into later, but really? This game isn't nearly as bad as other reviewers would have you believe. And I think that this game doesn't get enough credit for how revolutionary it actually was for the series at the time. But obviously we've got a game to cover before we can get into all of that, so what is Resident Evil Survivor? Well, just take your average everyday Resident Evil game and just plop the camera inside the main character's head, and that's pretty much the whole gameplay gist of Resident Evil Survivor. It pretty much mimics the entire gameplay loop of the survival horror entries into this franchise, aside from the fact that you're now able to view the world like the series has never seen before. And with this new perspective, you're still freely able to explore each environment, pick up and read various amounts of supplementary material, because I'm extremely sure that you actually care about the lore in this franchise, go around finding keys that allows you to enter the next area, locate healing items, weapons, ammo, and so forth, rinse repeat for a total of 2 hours, and then everything is all good. But since Resident Evil is a spooky, obviously we need something to fill in the gap of said spook. And holy shit, Survivor doesn't really let up. Since this game pretty much says to hell with the idea of trying to keep things scary for reasons I'll get into in a little bit later, the amount of zombies and enemies you encounter in a single room has been amped up. But another thing you'll come to notice as you keep playing is that enemies get thrown to you like it's toys in a Happy Meal you reluctantly need to get your little shit cousin that you don't like. Because within literal seconds of starting the game, you'll be encountered with your everyday normal zombie enemies. Then in the very next room, with no rhyme or reason, you'll be attacked by 2 Cerberus hounds. And then I shit you not, the very next location, you're going to need to fight 2 fucking lickers. Wowie zowie, guys. Foreplay doesn't seem to apply in this game. We're getting down and dirty almost instantly. You'll also encounter some incredibly caked up hunters, palette swapped versions of the lickers, big ass spiders, and on top of that, those weird plant things from Resident Evil 2. So we ain't exactly lacking variety for the enemy types whatsoever, but we've still got 2 more enemy types that we need to talk about. Firstly, because these guys are pretty much the most pointless enemies in the entire game, completely original to Survivor are these guys over here called the Cleaners. Weird SWAT-looking motherfuckers that have green blood, machine guns, and when you kill them, they sound like jaguars. I don't really know what the point of these enemies are, because during my playthrough, I think I really only encountered them like maybe 2 or 3 times, and when they show up, I'd almost argue they're easier to kill than most of the zombies you'll run into, but I really think that this was only done because of the fact that they have ranged weapons, so I applaud the devs for realizing that balance is an important thing to anybody's diet. And now for the final enemy. Well, this is where I think the absurdity of Survivor amps itself up to a massive degree, because throughout your travels through this island, taking down whatever enemy stands in your way for you to reach your end goal, they'll just straight up throw a tyrant at you. Yeah, no biggie, it's just a palette swap Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 that the game just loves spamming for you to fight over and over and over again, but since you have the power of the Second Amendment, these guys just take an abnormal amount of bullet for you to kill, and when you take them down, much like Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, you'll get a nice reward, mainly in the form of ammo for guns that you don't have yet. And that's pretty much all the different kinds of enemies you'll be fighting, with the only real exception being the final boss, which has a total of 3 forms, but once that's all out of the way, the game's pretty much over, so I really hope you weren't screaming towards the sky for you to get to battle a gigantic penis riding a chariot. But now that that's all out of the way, you may remember a bit ago I mentioned that I don't think horror was the primary focus for this game. Well, I think one of the biggest aspects as to why I think that is you see that little pistol over here? You see those bullets over there that you're firing towards every single enemy that comes towards you? Yeah, those bullets, they never run out. Yes, you heard me right. Despite this game still having the exploration, health items, as well as other guns with a limited supply of ammunition, the one weapon that you'll be no doubt using for 99% of the game has got an unlimited resource, meaning that when you enter a room and see 20 zombies coming after your ass, all you need to do is hold down the ready button and just go apeshit on that X button, because every single enemy in that room will die eventually. The only reason that I'm convinced that other weapons were included is to just tick off the variety checkbox and to also kill things maybe just slightly a little bit faster. I'm not really too sure on that because I only ever found the revolver near the end of the game. But from the copious amounts of ammunition I acquired, I can comfortably say that I believe that you still have access to a shotgun and a grenade launcher, so have fun when you eventually find them, because I sure as hell didn't. Now, moving along from the combat, I did say that the game still places an emphasis on exploration like the older games, but the only problem with that is because in this game's case, it seems that it's been completely streamlined to an almost mind-numbing degree. There are absolutely no puzzles in this game. That is, if you don't count going from point A to point B to find the key in point B, only to return to point A and use said key to progress as a puzzle. I personally didn't really mind this all too much because I'm pretty sure that it would have been damaging to the game's entire pace when action was clearly the main focus here. So I guess only needing to slightly backtrack to encourage you to explore just a little bit more was a pretty smart choice. And yeah, that's pretty much the entire gist of Survivor's gameplay. You go to one spot, find something to help you progress, commit undead genocide, maybe pull yourself a little bit when a hunter turns around, and then rinse and repeat. So the game itself seems rather dull in comparison to your average Resi game, right? So why did I end up enjoying it so much when so many people, even my favorite YouTuber, hates this game so much? Well, I can treat Resident Evil Survivor like the same way I treat games like Metal Gear Rising Revengeance as well as Death Stranding. If you go into this game with the mindset of it being a Resident Evil game, then yeah, of course it's going to suck, because there's zero puzzles, zero survival elements with you conserving ammo, and there's pretty much zero thought for you to go into every single new area when all it is the same shit you've been doing 15 rooms ago. But if you're like me and play these games for what they are, then yeah, it's pretty fun despite how mindless it can be. Now, I will admit the game is far from perfect. Some enemies have wonky hitboxes, and sometimes it's damn near impossible to line up your reticle with a fast-moving enemy so you can lock onto them, but these weren't all that annoying. The one thing I will say, however, that I can say 100% pissed me off the most is you being able to get stun locked by certain enemies, and since the control scheme is just a first-person RE as opposed to something like fucking Quake, you can't really maneuver around enemies fluent enough to avoid getting hit. Another thing that I just couldn't wrap my head around is that I don't really understand how I was supposed to find half of the weapons. Since everything was progressing so smoothly and I wasn't getting lost whatsoever, the fact that I was only able to find one other gun just in a random room at the end of the game just kind of sucks. So I wasn't entirely even sure if I missed him just because I decided to keep going on the route that progressed the story. But even still, it kind of makes me sad even if it was my own fault for not exploring enough. But genuinely, those are pretty much the only complaints that I really have with Survivor. Everything else, I just genuinely had a good time with. It was just a simple game to turn my brain off and just have a little bit of zombie killing fun. And the reasons why I say that this game could be considered extremely revolutionary to the franchise is because of not only its perspective being completely unique for the series, but I think that this was one of the first PS1 RE games that utilized full 3D environments, which is definitely some eye candy when you were so used to looking at these static backgrounds. And how these 3D environments are both implemented in gameplay and how it's used in cutscenes, both pre-rendered and in-engine, it makes everything feel a lot more dynamic, and hell, they look pretty nice when they're upscaled using an emulator. And hey, I don't think I really need to explain this all too much. The fact that the game takes place completely in the first person, that's revolutionary in and of itself when you take into consideration that this predates Resident Evil 7 by an entire 17 years. Another thing that I really unironically loved was the game's story, but in this case, it's not because it's well written or anything, or it's engaging whatsoever. It's just because it's fucking stupid. You play as this guy who really loves Amnesia: The Dark Descent so much that he decided to copy the condition for himself, exploring this island to find out what's going on, running after two kids because he must be a Minecraft YouTuber, and slowly gets his memories back as the game progresses. And the reason I say I love the story, well, I'll just play some of the cutscenes and let you figure that one out for yourself.
Vincent, it's me, your mother.
My mother?
Vincent, please, listen to your mother. I want you to leave Umbrella.
I don't know. I was only listening to it because I'm so bored. My brother told me to wait here. Oh, let me go!
I promise. Don't cry anymore, Lily. I may have been a bad person, but that was before. That's not who I am now. That's right. At At the request of my friend, Leon S. Kennedy, I came here to investigate. Oh, yes. I remember everything.
Immediately. Repeat. All personnel evacuate immediately.
What are we gonna do, mister?
Yeah. What are we gonna do?
I don't know, but don't worry. We can fly as long as we have fuel.
All in all, Resident Evil Survivor is a pretty damn fun game. It definitely won't be replacing your everyday Resident Evil game, but if you want to see what Capcom did to try and innovate the series a little bit back then, I'd say that there's no harm trying this game out. And I personally don't think it's really all that deserving of the negative reception that has been subjected to.
Now, despite Survivor's reception back in the day, which I still for shit don't understand why it was so overly negative, I have no idea what the hell they were playing, I'm still pretty sure Survivor sold well enough that Capcom wanted to continue with this idea, and thus, Survivor kind of spun off into its own sub-series called the Gun Survivor franchise. And you didn't exactly think I was just gonna stop milking you for ad revenue with just one game now, right? No, I've actually went out of my way and I've played the succeeding games in this franchise just to see whether or not they were able to improve with the formula they had with the first game, or continue to fuck it up.
Up next, we have ourselves the sequel, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. Now, you didn't misread that. Whereas Resident Evil Survivor had a completely original story, characters, and world, Survivor 2 decides to adapt the extremely beloved entry into the series, the once Dreamcast exclusive Code Veronica, developed by all of these people, and releasing it on arcades and the PS2 for Japan and Europe back in 2001. Now, whereas Survivor was pretty much trying to emulate the original games with the exception of the more action focus and the first-person perspective, Survivor 2 decides to say to hell with anything to do with horror and just makes it a flat-out arcade shooter akin to something like Time Crisis. With the exception, as to keep it within the Survivor name, you're still freely able to roam around every single environment until you reach your end goal. And I'm gonna be completely honest with you here, this is probably the shortest game in the entire franchise because it commits 100% to the whole entire idea of being more of an arcade shooter as opposed to being a survival horror game. Now, what exactly do you do in Survivor 2? Well, there's a total of 5 different maps for you to explore, all being ripped directly from Code Veronica. And the main goal is to get the set amount of keys the game asks of you for every single stage, and then hauling your ass to the biohazard room and then taking out whichever boss the game chooses for you. And before reaching the rooms where each of these keys are located, you'll have to go from room to room taking out enemies with a wide variety of different weapons. Like, once again, having the game give you an infinite ammo pistol, but unlike the last game, I was able to actually use some of the other weapons. And over here we have stuff like a shotgun, an assault rifle, and that's pretty much what I was able to find during the main stages. There are other weapons in the game, however, but I'll get into that a little bit later. The only other stuff that you get are first aid kits and green herbs to replenish your health, so this game is without a doubt more simple than Survivor 1. So what exactly does this game have going for it when you decided to cop this entry? Well, nothing. It's literally what you're seeing on screen right now. You run, you shoot, you kill boss, yippee, stats. Repeat that exact process for the 5 stages that is in this game, and then good for you. I really hope you didn't buy this game used. So it definitely without a doubt is a lot more simpler than Survivor 1, but I still wouldn't say that you can't have fun with this game. It's just another one of those cases where once again, you need to adjust your expectations accordingly, although you're going to need to lower your standards even more this time around if you're already used to the first game because they decided to dumb down the formula even more to the point in this entry where I'm convinced even a toddler could play it. But don't count this game out entirely if you think there's absolutely zero depth here, because it's all well and good for you to just run around stages killing any and all zombies with a handgun that has infinite ammo and doesn't need to reload, but the one thing you'll notice at the top of the screen is this countdown timer, and you're reading that correctly. If that thing runs out, Nemesis shows up. Yeah, if continuity doesn't really matter to you all too much in this franchise, which truth be told it really shouldn't, if you take a little bit too long to beat each stage, Nemesis is going to show up, and he's going to chase you down the entire stage until you beat it. Or get fucked over, whichever comes first. But as cool and fan-servicey as this is, I mean, if you were able to avoid him without a problem in Resident Evil 3, then you're not exactly going to have any issue over here either, which makes his inclusion feel kinda pointless. So after 30 minutes, the game is pretty much done. So what is there for you to do after all is said and done to keep you coming back? Well, you can change characters, if playing as this Canadian prick sounds like a fun idea, and you have another mode called Dungeon Mode, where you get to explore this clock tower, killing off enemies until you reach whatever goal has been set out for you to do. Which I didn't do. If it wasn't already really obvious enough from all the games I've played from this series, this isn't exactly my go-to game to play if I'm in the mood for a Resident Evil itch. And if I'm being completely honest here with you, I only really picked this mode so I can get footage with Steve. And this is where I say that there is more weapons in the game, but I only start to think that they're palette swaps based on which character you play with. And I'm not too sure if this gives you a huge advantage or not, because where Claire uses one pistol, Steve uses these dual-wheel pistols which he fucking steals from you that you need for a puzzle, the asshole! And where Claire gets an assault rifle, Steve gets these dual-wielded SMGs. The only other weapon I used before calling it quits was this rocket launcher that fires a dart into zombies which explodes after a few seconds, which I thought was kinda hilarious. Overall, while I still had fun with this game, it definitely is a much weaker entry when you compare it to its previous entry. Yeah, the graphics look a lot better, and I think it's way more blatant with the fact that you're not playing a horror game this time around, but still. Where the first game took me 2 hours to get through, Survivor 2 only took me 30 minutes, and I don't think that this dungeon mode is enough to really keep me invested for too much longer.
Now, the final game in this franchise is one that shocked the absolute shit out of me in a way that I don't think me or any of you would actually come to expect. But before we get to that game, we do have one honorable mention in this video.
I say that this is an honorable mention because I'll go into way more detail on it in another video, because where it is set in the same universe as the Resident Evil Gun Survivor franchise, it's not based on Resident Evil, but instead, it's based on Dino Crisis.
That's disgusting.
This here, ladies and gentlemen, is Dino Stalker, a game that is a hodgepodge between elements of the Resident Evil Survivor series and more traditional light gun games. If I had to compare this game to something from its own series, I feel that it's kinda in the same line as a Resident Evil Survivor version of Dino Crisis 2. And I also had a lot of fun with this game, just to give you guys an idea. But whenever I decide to cover the Dino Crisis franchise, that'll be when I properly take a look at this game. I just felt like I needed to mention it here since it is set in the same series as Resident Evil Survivor. But alright, enough wanking off to liquors. Here's the final game in the list of forgotten Resident Evil first-person shooters. Resident Evil Dead Aim. Without a doubt, the best game in this entire sub-franchise. And fun fact? Where the fuck is it? Probably one of my favorite Resident Evil games. But before we get into that, let's go over a little bit of history here. Released all the way back in 2003 exclusively for the PlayStation 2, Dead Aim is the fourth and final installment into the Gun Survivor series. And funnily enough, the game was developed by Cavia. Now, I'm pretty sure 99% of you don't even have the slightest clue as to who these people are, but you should be more than aware of the games they've made after this, because these are the exact same people who would later go on to develop the Drakengard franchise that inevitably would spin off into Nier. And I don't think I need to explain what that franchise is to any incel watching this. But not only that, they also developed two of my favorite Resident Evil games of all time, the Umbrella Chronicles and the Darkside Chronicles, rail shooters released on the Wii and later the PlayStation 3, which adapted the events of Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica, and even had their own special scenarios to help fill in the gaps between certain games, like how Wesker survived the mansion explosion in the first game, or in Darkside Chronicles how there's Operation Javier, a mission that shows off the relationship between Leon and Krauser before the events of Resident Evil 4. These games are truly special to me, and these fuckers are going to get their own video later down the line someday. But for now, let's see their humble beginnings with Resident Evil Dead Aim. And I understand I already spoiled it. This game is the best in the entire Gun Survivor series, and I think the plain and simple reason for that is that this is a classic Resident Evil game through and through, and was kind of more revolutionary in its own way when you compare it to the games that came out after it. But let's first get the basic gist of the game out of the way. In this game, you're stuck on this cruise ship, and you need to uncover what the hell is going on here, while killing off some good old-fashioned zombies and other familiar shitheads on your journey to do so. And you might just think that this video is just just turn itself into misleading clickbait, because this isn't first person. John, why do you spread misinformation on the internet? Well, you see, while exploration is just like the older games with you being in the third person, the moment you ready your guns, you zoom in and boom, say hello to some good old-fashioned early 2000s zombie doming goodness. And why this game works so well in my opinion is because everything just feels so damn right here. The atmosphere is second to none, the entire game is silent with the only thing breaking the silence being your footsteps and eventually the enemies that you'll be facing. The gunplay feels so damn tense and satisfying because if you choose to play this game with a controller, aiming can be extremely sensitive, making killing zombies a pain in the ass if you want to try and get a quick kill from a headshot, only to miss it and waste ammo. And you heard that right. Everything from ammo to your healing items is a resource that can run out, meaning that yes, while this game still falls under the same franchise as Survivor 1 and 2, the idea of making ammo scarce brings the horror up tenfold. I mean, the game is still Resident Evil, meaning that it isn't exactly the scariest thing on the planet if you're a veteran to this franchise like me. But in terms of the raw atmosphere of the cruise ship and the sound designs from the enemies, the weapons, and when you land that oh so satisfying headshot on enemies, it's enough to make you turn straight into an American. Now, I can't really remember if there are anything in the way of puzzles in this entry besides the whole idea of finding the key that allows you to explore a new location on the map, only for you to find something that you obviously need to find an item for in order to use it to progress further. But the way how Dead Aim incorporates all these scenarios really makes you feel right at home if you fell in love with these old school survival horror games to begin with. And that also brings me to why I personally think that Dead Aim deserves a shit ton more credit because of what it did to revolutionize the formula. Firstly, this is the very first proper third-person entry into the franchise, where you pretty much have full control over the view of your surroundings. Now, why does that sound like such a humongous revolutionary feature to Resident Evil? Well then, need I remind you that Resident Evil Dead Aim came out in 2003, meaning that it predated Resident Evil 4. Now, Dead Aim didn't nearly revolutionize the idea of a third-person shooter like Resident Evil 4 did. At the end of the day, you still can't deny the fact that without Dead Aim, the idea of a fully 3D environment third-person Resident Evil, that probably wouldn't have happened. Another reason why I think that this game is revolutionary is with its environment as well. I mean, it's a cruise ship, you know, something that the series wouldn't have revisited until Revelations an entire 9 years later, but in terms of its raw atmosphere, I think Dead Aim needs to take the cake here on its setting alone. And then probably the most important feature that I can't even understand why succeeding games in the franchise didn't follow with this game's blueprint. This is the first Resident Evil that allowed you to take aim and move at the same time, making this probably the first proper Resident Evil to incorporate a feature like this. I say proper Resident Evil specifically because Survivor 2 already did allow you to do this, but that game is definitely not a proper RE game. Yeah, it is kinda weird to do it. You have to enter your aiming mode first and then hold down L2 to be able to start moving, but still, Dead Aim is without a doubt a game that did a fuck ton to innovate for the series in a lot of ways, and I kind of find it sad that this game sadly was forgotten by most people. So my takeaway with this part of the series is that if there is any game I will 100% recommend you guys give a go off of this list, it's definitely this one. It snugly fits into what we know Resident Evil 4 as today, and in my opinion took what worked from this little spin-off franchise to make it something truly special. Much like Dino Crisis, why the hell did Capcom abandon this gem? Instead we have this.
And yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of the Resident Evil Gun Survivor series. And you know what? It's kind of sad that it had to end off so bittersweet. The best game in the sub-series to end out to be the last one? Man, that's kind of sad. I guess like Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles is kind of like the spiritual successor to these games, but still, I would have really killed for them to try doing something like they did with Dead Aim. But since we now know where Capcom's priorities lie nowadays, I don't think we should hold up breaths. But in any case, thank you guys all so much for watching this video. If you guys liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you guys disliked the video, then Nemesis is coming after you. If you guys want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming either a channel member or joining the Patreon. And speaking of that, special thanks to top tier YouTube member and top tier Patreon supporter, Mr. Aftonboy and a Panda in Space. I have been John from the channel with the freakishly long name, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye, love you all.